I did a little research on love and your typical marriage, and I found some interesting stuff. For instance, in your typical and ordinary marriage, a guy will spend 37 hours working at a paid job, while the woman spends 21 hours. And I thought actually both would be higher. When it comes to housework, a woman spends an average of 18 hours a week doing housework, while a guy will spend 10. And my wife doubts that last one's accurate. When it comes to talking, what's ordinary kind of depends on how long you've been married. During a 60-minute dinner, couples that have been married for 1 year will talk about 40 of the 60 minutes, and couples that have been married for 50 years or more will talk for 3 of the 60 minutes. And couples with young children, the only communication they have is with each other by mouthing words going, "What did we do?" Now, how about the average number of times an ordinary couple has sex? For ordinary marriages, the research says 26% of couples are having sex once a week, while overall majority are having sex once or twice a month. And kind of an interesting side note, 84% of women said they had sex with their husbands as a way to get them to do more chores around the house. How's that for romantic? And I think speaking for most men, we're perfectly fine with that. Now, for those of you who are married, I'm sure you're hearing some of these stats, and some of them sound right on target. Others maybe not so much. But let me ask you this, just overall, and don't raise your hand and don't throw any elbows, just in your own head, would you say your marriage, compared to the typical marriage, is just pretty ordinary? Or maybe a little better? Or maybe not so good? See, my guess is that many of us would say, we're doing okay. Or I'm kind of struggling. Or, we're not all that I like or hoped would be, but we're better than lots. My guess is that for most of us, ordinary almost feels inevitable. We look kind of at the pace of our life, we look at the families we grew up in, or we look at the obstacles that we have, and ordinary, it seems pretty good. Now, before we give into that idea, I want to read you something from one of the oldest marriage manuals in the entire world. And since I said old, don't think out of touch, because what I'm about to read you includes straightforward wisdom that deals with every part of marriage, including some steamy stuff about sex. In fact, so much so, back in the day, you weren't even allowed to read this book until you were 30. And the book is the Song of Songs, and it's straight out of the Bible, right here. And here's what it has to say. It says this, "O lover and beloved." So what this is to both the husband and the wife. And it says this, "Eat and drink. Yes, drink deeply of your love." And what this is God speaking to married couples. He's saying, eat and drink deeply of your love. God's saying, I want you to get all the good stuff there is to get, to eat and drink your fill, the very best of your relationship. In this here, there's not even a hint of God saying, well, you need to kind of keep your expectations in check. Don't be so unrealistic. Better than many is still pretty good. No, none of that. What he's saying here is I want you to have the best there is. I want your marriage to be beyond ordinary. So, what does it take to have a beyond ordinary marriage? And what if it isn't what we think it is? What if it isn't about just being lucky enough to have two people who've got it all together psychologically and emotionally, and then they come together? What if it doesn't require two people who have good self-esteem and grew up in a healthy, solid family with great role models for marriage? What if that's not it? What if it's not about two perfectly kind of compatible people or people who have great communication skills? What if it's none of that? If I told you you could have that, beyond ordinary, would you want it? Would you want to see your marriage move from ordinary to extraordinary? Would you? I know I would. When I said I do, and I think when you said you said I do, you didn't say that to settle for ordinary. No way. So why settle? Now, if for any of you who are single, tune out. Kind of tune back in for a second, because you may need this. 90% of all people in the U.S. will marry. And before you say, hold on, you know what? I've been there. I've done that. Didn't work for me, and I'm not doing it again. I understand what you're saying. But stats tell us that those who've been married at least once, at least half of you will marry again. So tune in, because what we're talking about today could make a big difference in your future, even if you're not seeing anybody right now. And you never know. You never know when Mr. Right or Miss Right might just show up. And even if that's not the case, Maybe you got kids, you have children. This could be a big help in navigating them in the right direction in their future. So the question is, where do you go? Where do you go to find out what it takes to have a beyond ordinary marriage?
Sorry I'm late.
I'm just glad you made it.
Well, I'm not so sure about this whole marriage counseling thing.
We need help. And besides, this isn't your ordinary marriage counselor. I booked us an appointment with Cupid.
The Cupid?
Yeah, I figured if anyone can help us fall back in love, it's him. Or it.
Well, I'm willing to give it a shot.
Hey, sorry I am late. How you doing?
See, honey, I told you it's Cupid.
Actually, no. Cupid couldn't make it. He's on vacation. So he sent me instead. I'm his brother, Stu.
Stu?
Our parents had a penchant for rhyming.
So if your brother's Cupid, that makes you Stu.
Only my mother can call me by my full first name. You can just call me Stu. So, what seems to be the problem?
I think it's mostly a communication issue.
I'm fine with communicating. He has trouble listening.
Okay, I tell you what. Why don't we try what I call an interpretation exercise? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to tell her exactly how you feel. And then I'm going to interpret what you really mean.
Okay. Well, I guess I feel like once we get the kids up to bed and then we settle down on the couch to watch a couple of shows, I just feel like we don't connect like we used to.
All right, now I'm going to interpret. He wants to have sex with you. Even if you're tired. Tired sex is better than no sex.
Is that what you really mean?
Well, I just think that...
Yes, that's definitely what he means.
Well, I think it's interesting that the man who won't lift a finger to help me put the kids to bed, or do the dishes, or put the laundry away, all of a sudden has all this energy to do something besides sit on the sofa. I mean, the only buttons he's pushing around here are the remote controls.
Okay, she's saying you ain't getting near this for a week.
Yeah, I got that loud and clear.
Okay, good, then it's working. Let's continue.
Okay, I'll go. I see what you're saying, but I don't know what to do next.
Okay, now let me stop you right there because, buddy, I think there's only one way you can interpret that. Okay, she is crazy about you. I mean, she is filled with so much love and affection that she literally doesn't know what to do with it all.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I'm not getting what I need, and I don't see a future for us if we keep moving forward in this ordinary routine.
Yeah. Or, well, that.
If you need help with the kids or the dishes or whatever, why don't you just ask?
I shouldn't have to ask.
She's saying that she shouldn't have to ask.
Yeah, I know. Look, can't we just be a little bit more obvious on what we want and what we need? Once we get the hang of it, we can go from there.
I suppose it doesn't make sense to hold things back from each other.
I'm getting a no secrets vibe here. Anybody else tracking with that?
Look, Stu, you've been great, but I think we've got it from here.
Yeah. And I don't have to pick the kids up from school for another hour.
Well, I know how to interpret that. I tell you what, I'm gonna go grab some lunch. I'll be back in about an hour, and you two just make sure you lock up before you go.
All right, I don't recommend that you look to Stu, the love coach, for marriage advice. But it does make sense that if God says, I want you to have a beyond ordinary marriage, the one that allows you to drink deeply of love, then we should look to Him for how to do it and find out what it takes. Now, before I go there, I want to back up just a little bit. A guy named Dr. John Gottman, who's done more research on the topic of beyond ordinary marriages than anybody, he says there's one distinguishing factor that'll move any marriage from ordinary to extraordinary. Gottman says that he can actually, this is fascinating, observe a couple talking just for 15 minutes, and he can predict with a 90% accuracy whether they'll be needing a divorce attorney by just simply looking for this one extraordinary factor. Here's what it is. What's the X factor? What's the X factor in these marriages? Gottman says it's not compatibility. It's not great communication skills. He says it's not about how emotionally healthy you are or the kind of family you grew up in. None of that. So what is it? He says the X factor in beyond ordinary marriages is this. It's all about conflict and how you resolve it. It's kind of like this one couple I know. They'd been married for years. And I could just tell they had this beyond ordinary kind of marriage. They never fought. And I remember I asked them, I said, so what's your secret? How do you keep your relationship so strong? And the guy told me, he said, well, twice a week we go out for a romantic candlelight dinner, dancing, long leisurely walk, back home. It's great. And I said, wow, twice a week? And he said, yeah. She goes on Tuesday and I go on Saturdays. Okay, that didn't really happen. The X factor, though, in extraordinary marriages is about resolving conflict. Let me be clear, not the absence of conflict, but actually how to resolve conflict. And that conflict, you name it. It could be about sex or money, disciplining the kids, dealing with the in-laws, you fill in the blank. But what makes marriages extraordinary is not the absence of conflict over those issues, but how you resolve them. And this is where God speaks to us. The one who wants us to kind of drink deeply of love, he tells us how to resolve conflict and move our marriages from ordinary to extraordinary. And what he does is he actually speaks first to the husbands and to the wives. And here's what he says. It's in Ephesians. It says this: husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. And then we skip down to verse 33. The next part, he speaks to wives and he says this: and wives, you must respect your husbands. Now, there are two words that jump out, the words love and respect. And the source of most all conflict comes down to issues surrounding really these two words of love and respect. I can still see it. I remember Sue and I hadn't been married for too long, and I can see her just jumping up and down, yelling at me, "You are making me crazy." And when I think back on some of those years, a lot of it goes back to the fact I know there were things that I was doing, unintentionally, but I was doing, that weren't allowing her to feel cherished or loved. At the same time, in one of our homes, if you walk down the hallway, there was actually an imprint in the hallway on the hall that matched my fist. Because I remember I was so angry, so upset. I remember just hitting the wall because of what was going on between Sue and I. And I think part of it went back to I just felt like, you know what? The way she kind of looked at me or respected me when we were dating, I just didn't feel that anymore. The best explanation, I think, of how to understand Ephesians 5, maybe that I've ever seen, is in a book called Love and Respect. And it explains how the source of most of our conflict is because we get caught in what the author calls the crazy cycle. And here's how it works. Without love, the woman responds without respect to the man. And without respect, the man responds without love to the woman. And the crazy cycle is all about how when a man's deepest needs is not met and the woman's deepest need is not met, it leads to each of them not meeting each other's deepest needs more and more and more and more. And respect isn't really the same as love. I mean, if you think about this, there are people you'd say, I really respect him or I really respect her. But that's not even the same thing as saying, oh, I love him or I love her. Respect and love are different, kind of like men and women are different, at least so I've heard. Feeling loved is about feeling important and feeling valued. And feeling respected is about being admired. Respect is about a feeling like you're being held in high regard by someone, while feeling loved is about feeling important and kind of cherished. And the whole thing is about love and respect. The woman, almost universally, and try it out with each other, wants to know that she's loved no matter what. And the man, almost exclusively, talk about this, see if this is true, wants to know that he is respected no matter what. And if the woman feels unloved, the man's not going to feel respected. And if the man's not feeling respected, odds are he's not going to be making the woman feel loved either. And what happens is round and round and round you go, and where it stops, well, I think everybody knows. It stops with an ordinary marriage. An ordinary marriage is not close. It's not really that satisfying. It's better than some, but it's not that great. It's just ordinary. And here's the deal. Right now, I guarantee you, I could take any married couple here today. I could clear the calendar for 6 weeks. No work, no errands, no nothing to worry about. On top of that, I could send you off to a beautiful place like, Tahiti or wherever. But if the woman is feeling unloved and the man is feeling unrespected, guess what? There's going to be conflict. And it's not going to get resolved. At the end of those 6 weeks, you're still going to be exhausted because you're still stuck in that crazy cycle. But here's an extraordinary truth. I could change nothing about your schedule. Same work pace, same chores, same errands, same bills to pay. Nothing changes. But the one X factor changes. You learn how to deal with the conflict in your marriage with love and respect. And you know what happens? You get off the hamster wheel, the crazy cycle. You do that, I guarantee, God's word guarantees, your relationship will be richer, more satisfying, more intimate, and your marriage will move from ordinary to extraordinary, beyond ordinary marriage, guaranteed. Now here's the truth, and let this settle in. Your relationship will have conflict. Can't avoid that. All right? It comes with the territory. In fact, studies have shown that the stuff that you're fighting about today, 7 of your top 10 issues will continue to be issues the rest of your life. And I know that's not real encouraging, but that's just what the research says. So you're going to have conflict. Might be about sex, might be about money, disciplining the kids, you name it. You figure that out. But the X factor is how are you going to deal with those conflicts? And if you deal with them with love and respect, you can have this beyond ordinary marriage. All right, so how do you do that? Well, God tells us. In the Bible, same book, if we go back to Ephesians, this time Ephesians chapter 4, it says this. It says, in your anger, do not sin. Now, there's actually an older translation, actually the old King James Version, it puts it this way, be angry and sin not. Now notice something. It doesn't say don't get angry. Instead it says when you do get angry, which is going to happen, when you do, don't sin. And sin here, remember from back to our series, The Story of Everything, sin is anything we do that puts distance in our relationship between us and God or us and another person. That's what sin is. So what does it mean, in your anger, do not sin? Is it kind of always about being calm and constantly talking sweet to everyone? No, that's not what it's talking about. Specifically to guys, in your anger, do not sin. Guys, this is making sure that you never let a conflict leave her feeling uncertain that she's cherished or doubting that she's loved by you. In anything you do or say, you can't let that happen. If you do, it's a sin because it's putting distance between you and her. Got it, guys? Now, ladies, this means no matter how mad you get, you never let him doubt, never let the man in your life doubt that you admire him and that he has your respect in anything you do or say. Because if you do, that puts distance between you and him, and that's sin. So here's the deal. The conflict will happen. You're going to get angry, but you determine, I will never do anything hurtful that'll put distance between the two of us. That's what it's talking about. I think all of us, we all know couples who seem to be almost like unable to stop themselves from saying cutting and hurtful things to each other. And it's like you stand back and you're watching them just destroy their marriage. And here's the truth. The truth is you can get better at marriage by making this one very powerful change and saying this, in my anger, I will not give in to the urge to hurt my partner or to win the argument by saying hurtful things, even if they're true. And that last part can be kind of tricky, isn't it? I mean, what happens when that hurtful thing, even though it's hurtful, is true and you say it? And it's easy to justify it and say, well, hey, I'm just telling the truth. Yeah, but you're also trying to win an argument. And in the process, you're hurting somebody. So what we have to do, men and women, resolve, I will not give in to the urge to hurt my partner or win the argument by saying or doing things, even if it's true. Even if it's true, I will not hurt them. Let me ask you this. You ever heard of something called the relational bank account? You ever heard of that before? No, we've talked about this, but I want to kind of go there again. And it works something like this. Anytime I do something the other person experiences as loving or respectful or positive, it's like making a deposit in the bank. And then anytime I do something that's perceived as unloving or disrespectful or negative, it's like a relational withdrawal from the bank. And research says that in an ordinary marriage, the ones that aren't all that great, aren't all that close, aren't all that solid and secure, there's this common ratio of loving to unloving interactions, positive and negative interactions, that's actually 1-to-1. So for every positive and loving deposit, there's a negative and unloving withdrawal. So if you put something in, you take it out, which leaves your relational account with a zero balance, nothing in there. But what they found, using the same metaphor, in extraordinary, beyond ordinary marriages, this is interesting. It says there aren't necessarily fewer withdrawals or negative interactions, but there are a whole lot more deposits. In fact, what it says, a 5-to-1 ratio of positive deposits to negative withdrawals, which leaves a surplus in the relationship account. So what all that means? What it means is that when there's a withdrawal, there's actually kind of money, relational collateral, in the relational account to cover it. Now this brings us to a second kind of big takeaway to have a beyond ordinary marriage straight from Scripture. And it says this: love covers a multitude of sins. In 1 Peter 4:8, love covers a multitude of sins. Think of this in terms of the relational bank account. If love is the 5 and sin is the 1 in 5-to-1, then love needs to outnumber the relational miscues by a margin of like 5-to-1. Now, I know in extreme circumstances, if there's like, and some of you maybe are even thinking of this about of infidelity or abuse, if we're going to keep with the metaphor, it's more like going bankrupt. All right? That's something different. But I think overall you understand what Scripture's driving at. And so overall, really, this is great news. It's saying you don't have to become perfect at never making a withdrawal, never hurting the other person. No. But it's a good idea to aim for that. But overall, you need to start by just making sure that there's good stuff. The good stuff is outnumbering the not so good stuff. You with me? God says we don't necessarily have to have fewer kind of unloving interactions. We just need to make sure that we're outnumbering them, right, 5-to-1 with the deposits. 5-to-1, so there's always money in the bank, emotionally, relationally. And guess what? If we understand that, it turns out God's word is exactly true, that love does cover a multitude of sins. There was a guy named Tom Anderson, newspaper columnist for years, and he tells a story of his own marriage, true story. He says he knew his marriage was kind of in trouble. Nobody was being abused or anything like that, but he wasn't getting from her what he wanted most, and he knew she wasn't getting what she wanted really from him either. And they were stuck in this crazy cycle, and things were not getting better. Well, then one summer, as they drove toward the beach house that they rented out for a week each summer, it was late at night. The kids and the dog were asleep in the back seat, and his wife was asleep next to him in the front seat. He turned the radio on, just kind of stay awake, and just happened to tune into a radio station with this Christian programming that urged men to love their wives as Christ loved the church. The kind of stuff we're talking about. And the challenge was simple. The challenge was given this: men, step up. Love your wives with all you got. And something just kind of clicked for him. And he decided to give it a try. For real. So on that vacation, he did everything he could to make his wife feel loved and cherished and valued. He talked to her about things he didn't usually talk to her about. He helped her with stuff he didn't usually help her with. He went on walks on the beach when maybe sometimes normally he'd be sitting on the couch watching TV. He said it wasn't easy, but he also said it wasn't quite as hard as he thought it would be. And he also began to notice that something different was kind of changing inside him. So when the vacation was over, he just kept on loving her, kept on doing all these things that made her feel valued and cherished. And after a few weeks, the relationship started to change. He said he started to feel closer to her, and she started doing things for him that she'd stopped doing over the years. And he thought to himself, hey, this is going pretty good. Well, then one morning he walked into the bedroom. His wife was sitting on the edge of the bed, and she's just staring kind of despondently at the floor. And so there's tears coming down her cheeks. And he says to her, he says, honey, what's wrong? What's the matter? And he was pretty sure he'd messed up somehow, and now the whole party was over. But she said, you know that doctor's appointment I had before we went on vacation? And he said, yeah, you mean the routine physical you had. What about it? She said, do you know something I don't know? And he said, what? And she looked at him and said, Tom, did the doctors tell you something? And you've been so good to me lately. Am I dying? And a smile broke across his face, and he took her hand and he said, no, you're not dying. He said, I'm just starting to live. I'm telling you, every one of you that are married or want to be married, hear me on this. God does not mean for you to settle for an ordinary marriage. He brought you together. And his vision for your marriage, he says, I want you to drink deeply of love. And so, guys, hear me on this. You love her. You make sure she always feels cherished. And ladies, respect him. Let him know you admire him. And you watch your marriage. It'll move from ordinary to beyond ordinary to extraordinary.